All right, people, here we are. The rematch. Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn 2. It's weird because, again, I speak about what I spoke about over the last week or so. It still doesn't really, like, maybe now we're getting the grand arrivals today, but it still doesn't really have that fight night feel. You know, the first fight back in 2022, it didn't happen in 2022, obviously. But the closer we got to it, the more kind of excited you became about it, because it did kind of seem like something that was just altogether different. And obviously we know what happened, and 23 and 24, they tried to make the fight, and it never really, whenever they tried to do it, you always just kind of were like, meh. That's kind of how you were. You were just kind of like, meh. Then they announced it for April of this year. I think they announced it at the very, very start of this year, and you did feel like there was something to it. You felt like, okay, there is something to this fight, and come fight week, there was a lot of hype around it. Come fight night, obviously the fight delivered, and there was an awful lot of buzz around it. This one just feels, I've said it about this fight before, that it feels to me like a one-time event. As in, it needed to happen. It happened at the perfect time. It had the perfect circumstances around it. You know, Chris Eubank Sr., the rehydration, everything. It had all of that, and the fight delivered, and it just felt like that's the box ticked for this fight. This one just feels, although it's a big fight, and I've no doubt it'll do good numbers, it just doesn't have that same spark and excitement factor going into it the first one did. But nevertheless, I still expect a good fight night. Let's talk about who I think is going to win this fight, how I think they're going to win it, and some of the things that are going around in the build-up to this fight. Let's start, of course, with the tail of the tape. He won the first fight, so we'll introduce him first. That is Chris Eubank Jr. From the UK, 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. He brings a professional record of 38 professional fights, 35 victories, 25 wins by way of knockout. 3 defeats, one of those defeats coming by way of knockout, but he did avenge it by stoppage himself, and that was to Liam Smith a couple of years ago. Now, Chris Eubank Jr. is certainly back a couple of years ago, was solid, if nothing else, world level there or thereabouts. I think that after the Liam Smith fight, I think that they missed the boat there. They were out of the ring for over a year. He didn't keep Bomac on, although he has Bomac back in his camp now. And I think that that was Eubank Jr.'s real chance to really push ahead and maybe challenge for a world title. But it seems Eubank is going down the road of, let's make that money. That seems to be the road that he's going down. And look, same with Conor Benn. The one thing you would say about Conor Benn is that he has, a little bit more time. You know what? I'm surprised because Conor Benn, Eubank Jr. is 36 years old. Conor Benn's tail of the tape is 24 fights, 23 victories, including 14 knockout wins. He's 5'8". Doesn't list his reach there, but I would imagine I think he definitely has a shorter reach than Chris Eubank Jr. I just don't know how long it is. I forget that he's 29 years old. So Conor Benn, when Ben turned over, it was a decade ago. He was about 20 years old. And I don't want to, how do I make this sound, right? Conor Benn, with the way he can sometimes behave, certainly with the way he's behaved in the past over the last couple of years, and even in the build to this fight, I have to say, you do get the impression that he's younger, because he does behave like someone who's basically in their early to mid 20s, you know, and genuinely, I'm surprised. I always get surprised when I see his age. I'm like, 29, Jesus Christ, man's pushing 30, but he still tries to come with this Essex gangster vibe. You would have thought he would have well outgrown that by now, clearly not. That is Conor Benn in terms of just the way he is mentally, in terms of, you know, what he's, the persona he's trying to come across with. But the actual Conor Benn fighter, you know, he is very similar to his dad, Nigel. Looks-wise, stylistically, obviously Nigel was much bigger than Conor Benn. He was a natural 160, 168 pounder, whereas Benn, haven't seen him stand next to Ishmael Davis in photos, and bear in mind Ishmael Davis is cutting weight to get down to 154. You could tell, Conor Benn's a welterweight. He's blowing up welterweight. That's what he is. That's his natural weight, welterweight. And even at 154, I think he would be very much undersized. So welterweight is probably the preferred division for him moving forward. Now, first time around, there was a lot of, how would I explain it? There was a lot of animosity more so for Conor Benn. I'm sure there was for Chris Eubank Jr., given the fact that the first proposed date was pushed back through no fault of his own, and people were still making it's Eubank's fault. It's not his fault at all. He didn't fail 2 PED tests. But for him having to also make weight, for him having to go and adhere to a rehydration clause, at the end of the day, you did sign those contracts, so that is what that is. But for having to do that for a non-title fight as well, and having to make an exact weight when there are fights up and down the UK at middleweight that are non-titles, where the board don't give a damn if you weigh 162, 163 pounds, So for me, I think there was a lot that Eubank could have been, annoyed about. And in the past, he has been known, like against Billy Joe Saunders, like against George Groves, to freeze on that big stage. But with age comes experience, comes, you would hope, wisdom. And he doesn't seem to have that problem anymore, because if he was freezing, I think that was in the XL Arena where he fought Billy Joe, and he obviously fought George Groves up in Manchester, to go back to those arenas, like against Liam Smith, even after a defeat, and to perform and be able to overcome that, and to walk out in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, biggest fight of your career, to be able to still perform under those lights, it shows that Chris Eubank Jr. has grown a lot mentally. Conor Benn is a emotional character, it's fair to say. I don't think there's ever going to be a risk of him freezing on the big stage. That doesn't seem to be in his MO. But I think when it comes to big occasions, we've seen it a few times in Ben's career. We've seen it when he fought Cedric Payneau in the first fight, when he got dropped, when he got hurt. He got very reckless, started swinging for the fences, and ended up actually probably exerting too much energy and leaving himself open. I thought he lost that first fight. We've seen it again in this Chris Eubank Jr. fight, the first fight. Very reckless from very early on, swinging, missing, exerting a lot of energy. Although he did have success in there, has to be said. He did appear to stun Chris Eubank Jr. in round 3, and he did obviously have some success. He did swell Eubank Jr.'s face up. Eubank Jr. was obviously feeling the weight of some of those shots, but nevertheless, there was nothing there. And bear in mind, you're talking about a dehydrated Chris Eubank Jr. as well. If dehydration played a factor, which I believe it did in the Liam Smith loss, which I genuinely do believe it did, because he finished making weight for Conor Benn for that fight that never happened, because bear in mind it was pulled literally at the 11th hour on fight week. He finished that camp in October to then go and take a fight in January. Of course, he wasn't fully ready. Well, not that he wasn't ready, but I don't think he was fully recovered from the weight loss going into the first proposed Benn fight. So I do think dehydration played a part in that. And he was definitely dehydrated. I have no doubt that he wasn't in the first fight, but it obviously didn't play enough of a factor for him to touch down or touch the canvas. If there's a rehydration clause which there apparently is, but if Eubank has to adhere to it, well then, I think we could have a different fight in our hands, because Conor Benn, although he's 29, he's getting up there in age at the end of the day, 29 for a welterweight who, although it's not the strongest division, it's going to get stronger when some of these guys like Devin, Ryan and all move up. He can still recover from, and Conor Benn took a lot of punches in that first fight, make no mistake. He can still recover from that, and probably recover from it quicker, whereas Chris Eubank Jr., given the fact that he is now 36 years old, given the fact that it was punishing, not just making weight, but the fight itself was also punishing, there's a reason probably why we didn't get this fight in September and we're only getting it now in the month of November. I think it's largely down to the fact that he needed more time to recover. I think it's largely down to that fact. I think Chris Eubank Jr. is a very proud man, and he wants to give himself the best chance of winning. And I think he knew, right, 5 months after the fight I had, not just the fight itself, but the cutting weight, the making weight, the maintaining that weight overnight, that would have taken a lot out of him. So he would have needed ample time to be able to go again. Conor Benn, not so much. Pretty much ready to go a couple of weeks later. Benefit of youth at the end of the day. If Eubank Jr. is not adhering to this rehydration clause, if he's fully recovered from the first fight, in my mind he should be winning this fight. I think that with Bomac in his corner, Bomac is a very good strategist. He's a very good strategist. He knows what he's looking for in terms of improving fighters. He was able to improve Chris Eubank Jr. The best I ever seen him was in that Liam Smith rematch. Under the tutelage of Bomac, he was disciplined, he was measured, he was composed, he closed the show when he needed to. It was yes, you could say it was a less than 100% Liam Smith, fair enough, and I'm not going to even make any bones about that. It was a less than 100% Liam Smith, but nevertheless, Eubank still had to mentally recover from being knocked out by the guy. He had to put on a show, he had to look good, and he did all those things. And Bomac is a fantastic trainer. I think he will look at the first Ben Eubank Jr. fight and think, right, you did these wrong. When you were having your most success, you were doing X, Y, and Z. Let's focus on that. And crucially, some people were saying, well, given the fact that Bomac is US based and Chris Eubank Jr. is based in, I think, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, the Middle East, that maybe it's going to be a little bit trickier for these two to coexist. Will he get the most out of Bomac? Well, apparently Bomac's been over there training with Chris Eubank Jr. the whole way through, so he's had the benefit of him in camp. With Conor Benn, ain't broke, don't fix it. Still training with Tony Sims. Daniel Dubois is singing his praises amongst others. So I think Conor Benn, he really needs to just, and it's hard for someone like a Conor Benn who is an emotional character. He's just like his dad Nigel. It's going to be difficult for him to keep a check on his emotions. If he can do that and fight a more disciplined fight and not waste as much, because Conor Benn, yes, he was landed on Chris Eubank Jr. first time around, he definitely was, but he was wasting so many shots, it was insane. You know, and Conor Benn has a good gas tank, but there's only so many shots you can waste before you start slowing down as well. And as you start slowing down, if there is a lot of power, if there is a lot of weight on those shots, the weight is inevitably going to go. You see it with fighters all the time. Vasily Lomachenko didn't really want to engage with Teofimo Lopez until Teofimo Lopez started to fatigue, he started to slow down, and crucially, Loma started to feel that the weight was leaving them shots. That's when he was able to say, right, now let's turn it up. It was too little too late, but you get what I mean. So Conor Benn's going to want to try and be focused, keep a check on those emotions, because when you fight like that, you're burning up energy. You're burning up energy even before you've even thrown a punch. Negative, or what was I going to say? Nervous energy. Not negative energy, nervous energy. So Conor Benn really needs to be careful going into this rematch. Personally, I've seen a lot of people say they're picking Benn. I've seen a lot of people say they're picking Eubank. It is very much divided, but I would say the majority, which is just more than 50%, are going with Chris Eubank Jr. And I personally think that Eubank needs to be a bit more savvy defensively, which with Bomac in his corner, I think he will be. And ultimately, I think that repeat or revenge, I think we're looking at repeat. I think that the first fight was roughly, what was it, 8-4 there or thereabouts? It was, 8-4 on all three of the judges' scorecards. I think we're looking at a similar score to that. Maybe 115, 113, 5 rounds to 7, 8 rounds to 4, there or thereabouts. I'd be very surprised if it's a resounding win either way this time around. And I know you could say a resounding win, a knockout win is fairly resounding, but you know what I mean? I think I'd be very surprised if either guy really dominates this fight. You know, if Benn goes in and, stops Eubank late, having dominated every round and vice versa. I'd be very surprised if that is the case. I think we're looking at a very competitive fight. I think we're going to be looking at a very, very good fight. And I think with Chris Eubank Jr. more so, knowing that he probably is near the end of his career. He just announced that he's going to be a dad twins, and he has my absolute massive congratulations. That's an absolute blessing. I think Chris Eubank Jr. is going to know, all right, look, I'm not going to win a world title most likely. I'm not really in the game for that anymore. I'm in the game for, how many zeros on that paycheck. I think he's going to want to, if he is, nearing the end, he's going to want to go out, on the best note he can. Conor Benn, the worry I have for Conor Benn is that if he loses this fight and he takes a punishment, one, it's going to be harder to get down to 147 pound, even if you're not the biggest 154 pounder. It's still the body's not been used to it for a long time. And two, you're pushing 30 years old now. Is there going to be any residual damage? You haven't fought consistently since 2021, really. 2020, because you only fought once in 22, once in 23, once in 24. This will be a second fight this year. So it's not been a consistent time of it for Conor Benn, which is really crazy considering the trajectory he was on in the year 2021. But yeah, Eddie Hearn was selling the Chris Algieri's of the world, the Samuel Vargas's, real dangerous and this, that, and the other. But we all knew they weren't. But at the end of the day, it was still the right path you're bringing him on. Learning from these fights, looking good, getting confidence, getting rankings. So this has just been a crazy detour. It really has. And I hope that doesn't come back to bite Conor Benn, because the welterweight division right now, on the surface, is absolutely there for the taking. No disrespect to these guys. Rolly Romero, he's... Seriously. Mario Barros, he got beat by an ancient Pacquiao. Obviously it's a draw, but he was beat by an ancient Pacquiao. Conor Benn would have no bother with him. What's the other guy's name? I can't think of his name. Lewis Crooker. No offense to Lewis Crooker, but yeah, solid. I thought you lost the Paddy Donovan fight, to be honest with you. I really do. The second fight, obviously you were on the verge of getting stopped in the first one, but you see what I mean. The welterweight division there, last thing you want is Devin Haney's, the Brian Norman Jr.'s, the Ryan Garcia's, the Teofimo Lopez's, the guys from 140 coming up. It's going to get busier, it's going to get more stacked, and it's going to get ultimately a lot more difficult. So this is the perfect time to, at the very least, pick up a world title. I know Conor Benn will say that that's his main goal, but it seems like money is at the minute. And again, at the end of the day, get that bag, fair enough. But that bag is only going to be there for, but so long. The history books will say you're a world champion forever. So That's what I got to say on that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I hope, as always, people, you enjoyed the video. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. And people, I will leave it there until next time. Peace.